Okay, so I think we're now recording now. So good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here today. I think it's for many of us, a lot of us are in different parts of the world. Some are in Scotland. It was very cold this morning. For those of you in different parts of the world, I don't know how cold it is around your area, but it's great to be here today. My name is Christian Harrison, and I'm privileged to be the facilitator of the research seminar series of the School of Business and Creative Industries of the University of the West of Scotland. We have been having this series over a year now, and I think this is maybe almost the 40th seminar we've had. And it's great because, as you can see, I don't have any speaker today. It's going to be Christian speaking today. So it's not me. Normally, I'm always introducing somebody else to do the talking. But today is going to be Christian speaking. So that's great. It's going to be me not introducing anybody. So it's quite difficult now because I'm used to admitting people when I have to be the one to speak. I think I've been looking forward to this seminar clearly because I believe it's very apt and it's very important that we discuss about it. But no pressure. I'm glad everybody is here today. One of the things I always tell people, and we have been doing it over time, try and introduce yourself on the chat. So feel free to tell us where you're coming from because I can see a lot of faces and names I've never seen or heard before. So feel free to tell us where you're coming from if you're from the US or anywhere. So just put it in the chat. Just say hi. Let's get to know who you are. That would be very, very useful. As you can see, I muted everybody and the rules of engagement for today. Please try to mute yourself when you're not talking. That would help so that you won't have any background noise. And of course, feel free to put on your cameras. I can see Joshua, I can see Angela, I can see Citron, I can see Yene. So it's great to always place a face to the name, but of course, no pressure. If you can't put on your cameras, we can always see you. So great, I can see a lot of people putting their cameras, so that's great. So feel free to use the chat as well and try to engage if you can. So I think that's all for the introduction, but today we'll be looking at how to conduct a systematic literature review. Like I said, I was looking at the number of people that registered, and you can see that we have over 189 people that registered for this. I was like, wow, is it a lot of people want to come and see my face or something? Or is it, I was like, okay, I was like feeling, okay, maybe they want to see Christian. But unfortunately, I know that's not the truth. We want to hear and learn about systematic literature reviews. And that's what we're going to be doing today. Unfortunately, I have the experience and also the expertise, and that's what we're going to be doing. I'm going to take this in a different format because it's not a research seminar, rather it's a workshop. So I will, for those of you that really know me, you know I like to talk, I like to engage. So I would do it in a very workshop format and get you guys to contribute. Don't hesitate to interrupt me. I like to be interrupted. In the next 1 hour, that is the kind of thing we want to do because I'm not a sage on the stage. I'm not just going to tell you this is what it is. I also want you to engage with the process. So feel free to interrupt anytime. And of course, if I put you on the spot, don't feel bad. You can go back after the session, come and tell me, okay, I was not happy. But for now, don't be scared, but it's going to be us trying to share our experiences as well. So first, I would try to share my slides. I think that's where the problem is going to be because I have to be admitting people. And thanks everyone that is introducing themselves on the chat. Thanks for everybody that has joined today. And I think we have more people coming in. So first, let's see. So I guess you can all see my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yeah,
yes,
it's visible.
So we're looking at today how to conduct a systematic literature review. First, how many people have conducted one before? Has anybody conducted a systematic literature review before? You can just put your thumbs up. Okay, I'll be able to see. I can't see right now. If you have done one before. Okay, I can see 2 people. Okay, good. Okay, so we'll be talking about how to conduct one today, clearly. So, of course, the first thing is, my name is Christian Harrison. As you already know, I'm a reader in leadership in the School of Business and Creative Industries. I'm also the chair of the Academy for African Studies, and I chair the British Academy of Management, Leadership and Leadership Special Interest Group. This is one of my pictures after the pandemic. I was feeling like, okay, let me just have a nice picture of myself. Initially, of course, my first career is in pharmacy. A lot of people that know me ask me that question. Oh, Christian, why did you leave pharmacy? What happened? I always tell them that I didn't like money. I wanted to run away from money. I wanted to go into academia because I didn't want so much money. But that was a joke, really. But still, during the COVID pandemic, I always felt, yes, I should have been in the front line. But my first degree was in pharmacy before I moved into academia. I have a PhD in leadership, and I've supervised a lot of students to completion within the range. I do a lot of teaching.
Hello, just a quick one, sir.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask if we could get the presentation slides.
Yes, Tunde, you will get the slides. You will get.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm happy for you to interrupt me, and that's the way I like it. So I'm glad that you did that. Don't worry, you will get the slides, so you can all listen. And instead of trying to, of course, you can also take notes. And the video will also be available on our webpage as well. So for those of us that can want to go back to the video. So I'm an academic. My PhD was in leadership, do a lot of leadership work as well. Like I said, I chair the British Academy of Management Leadership Group. I do a lot of talk on leadership, do a lot of media work as well on leadership, do a lot of consulting on leadership for the UK Cabinet Office, for Scottish Government, and so on. But what's important is I also write, and I always believe that in order for you to be able to change the world, you need to write a book. So I've written a couple of books on leadership, but for us today, and the reason why I'm here, because of my expertise is on systematic literature reviews. I've conducted quite a lot, and I've published several systematic literature reviews to date. And I'm a humanitarian. I have an NGO on leadership, and it's called Leadership Mode, and it helps raise the next generation of leaders. So that is me in a nutshell, and that is the person that I'll be talking to you today. But today we'll be trying to look at 5 key things. The first is, what is a literature review in the first place? We're looking at the type of literature review. Then how I have conducted systematic literature reviews over time. Then its limitations. So we'll try to do that in the next maybe 30 minutes. And of course, there'll be time to ask questions. But in case we don't have that time, please feel free to interrupt me while I'm talking so that we can, so if you feel, okay, yes, I want to ask this question, ask me the question while I'm talking so that we won't have to wait until the end because you might forget. And of course, try to use the chat box if you can, but I will try to see how I can work with the chat box as well, because of you would see that it might not be that easy to do and also look at the chat. So the first thing is, what is a literature review in the first place? If you look at the first thing, I've examined a lot of PhDs, DBAs, and so on. And the first thing every examiner looks at is usually the references. And no matter what you do, it shows you that you've engaged with the subject. So it shows you that, yes, you know what you're doing. And for me, it's so important that you're like a detective and you're trying to examine almost like Sherlock Holmes. And okay, you want to find out everything that's been written in the field. And it means that you have to persevere. You need to be determined. You need to engage with what is within the area. And when you look at it, you can see that old picture of that man there with all the books. For those of us that are librarians here, you will see that this is how it used to be many years ago, where you had to read all the books to conduct a literature review. But now things have changed. You don't have to read all those books physically, but you have to read the books. Those days you could run away and say, oh, yes, I've read almost everything. But now with the internet, with online databases, it now becomes even more difficult because you have access to so much, but you also mean that you need to be able to read so much. because now you can't say that there's nothing that written on entrepreneurial leadership or nothing that written on servant leadership and so on. So you can see that it becomes, it's easier, but of course, more challenging. And that's what we're looking at today. And going into the next thing, let me add the people that are trying to join. Admit all. Okay. Okay, so what does a literature review mean? Maybe anybody that can help me with that. What does it mean to do a literature review? I told you that I'll be asking 1 or 2 questions. What does it mean to you? Anybody? Just, you can mute yourself. What does it mean to conduct a literature review? What does it mean? What is a literature review? Anybody that wants to help, don't be shy.
To do a study of the current and past academic literature on a particular topic, and then to critically review it, comparing and contrasting authors' viewpoints, looking at the research and seeing where they're the same, where there's different, and maybe where there's gaps in information.
Okay, good. Thanks very much, Jan. That is a very good definition and a very textbook one as well. You're looking at, you mentioned something, you're looking at gaps. You're looking at critical evaluation. Great. And looking at what authors have written before. Any other person that wants to add to what Jan has said? Any other person? Well, are we happy with what Jan has said? Any other person that wants to add to what?
It can also mean that you are situating your research in the framework, in the bigger framework, so that we are telling the reader that I'm not repeating what others have done. I'm aware of what others have done. This is the direction I'm going to go, and this is going to add something new to the literature. Thank you.
Good, Bernard, good. I know we don't have so much time, but that's it. You're trying to position yourself because you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And for me, a literature review is a selective analysis of existing research, which is relevant to your topic. So what you're trying to do is, one, there's an existing research, so you're selecting. So you're not just looking at anything, but you're looking at, you're conducting a selective analysis of the research that's existing, but it has to relate to what you're trying to do, to your project, to your topic. So therefore, it's both a selection and evaluation of published and unpublished documents available about your proposed topic. So you're looking at both published and unpublished, but what's important is that it's a selective analysis of the existing research that's relevant to your topic. So you're not looking at everything in general. But what is the purpose of a literature review? I would have asked the questions again, but it's clear that you've all said it. Bernard, you said it. Jan, you said it. First thing is you don't want to reinvent the wheel. What people have done before, why are you doing it again? So you need to know, if you're doing a literature review, you want to know what people have done so that you wouldn't necessarily do the same. You also want to find out what other scholars are writing about the topic. What is the argument? What are people saying about leadership? What are people saying about entrepreneurship? What is the conversation going on? You want to learn about the methods and approaches that are appropriate for your study. So which way can what is the approach that Harrison took? Or what's the approach that Sunday took? Or what approach that Iene took? Does it show credibility to the way it should be done? You also want to learn about the appropriate theory that underpins your work. For somebody like me that looks at leadership, what theoretical framework do I need to examine? What theory is going to underpin what I'm trying to say or what I'm trying to do? Then, of course, it demonstrates that you know your contribution. So at the end, you're trying to find out the gaps. So you want to know, okay, yeah, this is how I'm going to contribute to this area. It is what's going to give me originality, what's going to give me novelty. And for many people, it also shows that you can demonstrate that you know what others have done, because that's the only way you can show the novelty or originality in your work. For some of us that don't have PhDs or are looking at getting a PhD, it shows your examiners that you can do an effective literature review, because that is important. Because if you don't do a literature review, you won't be able to justify the gap to knowledge. And finally, for many scholars that are here, it is the only acceptable part or accepted part of university research, and you cannot have a thesis without one. So for many people that are writing a thesis, it's important that you have a literature review. So that's the purpose of one, and that is why you need to do one. But there are different types of literature reviews. There is the narrative one, and there is the systematic literature review. So there are two types. The narrative one that many of us are used to, and there is a systematic literature review that we are here to learn much more about. So, why a systematic literature review? First, can anybody just tell me what it means? What does the systematic literature review mean? What does it mean to you? Why are you here? What does systematic literature review mean? Anybody that wants to just...
Excuse me.
Okay.
It is a scientific process of reviewing previous study because it has a chronological order. So that is why it is scientific.
Okay, I like what you're saying, Ayodele, because it has a chronological order. It is scientific, so there is a process. Any other person? Why? What does it mean? Why is systematic review?
Yeah, AB. I want to add to that definition that it is reproducible.
Reproducible. Good. It is reproducible, and that is very important. It's reproducible. Okay, great definitions by everyone. To me, it's the first thing is.
I actually wanted to say
Yeah.
it brings out the evidence from studies that have been conducted.
Okay, good.
And be gold standard for practice.
Good. It brings out the evidence from studies that have been conducted. So, and it's, of course, it's a gold standard. I like the fact that you say gold standard. A lot of my colleagues, they tend to argue with me like, okay, yes, because all my PhD students, they've always done a systematic literature review. So people like, okay, why do you force your students? I don't force them, but I always tell them that it's important they do one because of it would help you to be able to conduct, it gives you the ability to show that your work can be reproduced. It also shows that it is transparent as well. Because through a systematic literature review, you're able to show the gaps. You're able to say, yes, this is how I came up with these papers. This is why I'm able to show that I've worked on this. So it shows a systematic and scientific process. So most of the time, it's something that we should push. But of course, for many of us that are from the medical sciences, some of you might be from medical sciences, it originated from there. It was something that was proposed by James Lind in the 17th century. And what he was trying to do, he was trying to do a treatise of scurvy. And he was trying to ensure that he's able to eliminate all the rubbish, according to him. So the whole idea was to get only the literature that relates to scurvy. So this is something that is very popular within the medical sciences. And the reason why it evolved was because many people criticize the narrative reviews. One of the problems with narrative reviews is it's very descriptive. We don't know how you came up with the papers. Why is it that maybe Ebby is looking at Harrison's work? How did you come up with these papers? There are so many papers in the domain. There are so many papers in the field. So most of the time, it's very difficult for you to come up with the justification of why you came up with those papers. So, and then most importantly, if you don't conduct one, you can have an unmanageable number of information, so many papers, and they are so large and they lack criticality. So as a result of the drawbacks of the narrative literature review, the systematic literature review was advocated and proposed as a good alternative because it's transparent, it's systematic. It means that if I conduct it, Umar can go back and conduct the same process with my search strings and databases and get the same results. So it means that it minimizes the bias. It means that you're able to justify the papers that you've used. And most importantly, it shows you that you are able to get reliable information. So this, of course, the ways it has been viewed over time. It's very common, was more of Tranfield and Denya that came up with most of it. But as you can see that for many of my papers I've written over the years, we tend to use such approach as well. Any questions? Any questions? So we're okay at the moment.
Yeah, I have one question. The narrative literature review is normally part of a paper versus a systematic literature review can be a paper in its own. Is that correct?
Yes, Michael, it can be correct. So with a systematic literature review, you can make it a paper on its own. Even the systematic literature review can also inform your literature review in your paper. So it doesn't mean that systematic literature review has to be a paper on its own. The literature review in your paper can be a systematic one. So when you're writing for a journal, you just need to highlight that the literature review was conducted systematically, but you might not need to go deeper into the results if the focus is not on providing the findings of the systematic literature review. But of course, the systematic literature review can be a paper on its own. And paper, I've published a lot of papers on that.
And are we going to cover the topic today if we want to make it a paper, a standalone paper, what it
Exactly.
takes?
That's what we're going to do today, Michael.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Okay, so Aimin.
Hi, Kristen. Hi, everyone. Something that was mentioned in the chat was about the inclusion and exclusion criteria in terms of the decision as to what to include within a systematic literature review and what to exclude. Is it up to the researcher, in our case, in my case, for instance, a PhD student, is it up to me to decide and justify my exclusion and inclusion criteria?
Okay, do you know what I mean? What I will do is I'll answer that question after we have done the process. So you're asking a question without, we have not conducted the process yet. So that question will come after, don't worry. But if I've not answered the question then I would answer it. Okay, good, Aimin. So let's see. So now we know why we are doing it. But how do you conduct one? How is it done in the first place? And that's why you're here. There are it's a three-stage process. It was proposed by Tramfield in 2003, Tramfield Daniel and his colleagues. I've also used that at least in the last 7 years as well. And like I said, it emerged from the medical sciences. There are 3 stages, and the first stage is what I call organizing the review. Before you start conducting a systematic literature review, you need to identify the need for the review. So for those of you that are writing papers, it's important that you state in your paper, going back to what Michael had asked, that you used these 3 stages. So the stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 we're talking about. So in stage 1, the first thing is you need to identify the need for the review. Before you start the review, why are you doing the review in the first place? Has there been any systematic literature review that has been conducted in the domain? If it has been conducted, what makes your work different? Don't do a systematic literature review just because you just want to do one. If somebody has done one already, or there have been some that has been conducted in that same field, then you might not necessarily need to do one again for yourself, except the review questions are different. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, why am I conducting one? What is the need for one? So you do that by scoping the field. So a scoping study is required. So you go and first you search, do a broad search with some keywords and just try to find out what you want to look at. Then you'll be able to identify whether a systematic literature review is done, it needs to be done or not. For somebody like me that has done a lot on entrepreneurial leadership, I've published like 3 systematic literature reviews on that. So before somebody can publish a systematic literature review on what I've done, the person needs to have different review questions that I'll be looking at. So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, do I need to do one within this space? If there are existing ones, what's going to make mine different? Then if you have identified the need and you think that, yes, I need to conduct one, the next thing is to establish an expert panel. An expert panel means a panel of experts. These are people that are good in the domain. These are the people that know their stuff. They know the literature. So most of the time, these are the people, if you're doing a PhD, like I mean, you're saying, it might be your supervisors, maybe your director of studies. For most of us that are writing, it might be people that you know that know about this literature. Maybe if it's about entrepreneurial leadership, those that have written about it over time, but people that you can work with. Their role there is to help you look at your review questions. So their role is to ask to find out whether the review questions you want to address, whether it makes sense or not. So in a systematic literature review, you need to establish an expert panel, people that understand the literature, that know what it is. It might be 2 or 3 people, but their role is to be critical judges and find out whether the review questions you want to use or adopt is appropriate and whether your review protocol is right. So within that, the next thing is to develop your review questions. This is very important because this is what is going to guide your systematic literature review. it's not research, they are not your research questions, they're called your review questions, because that is what you're going into the field to go and find out, not the data collection, but within literature. So you have to have review questions that are not too broad and also that are not too narrow. For somebody like me, just imagine if I say my review question is to find out what is leadership. That would be very difficult because I would get so many, it would be unmanageable because a lot of people have defined leadership in different ways. So that might not be their best approach to take. But just imagine if I ask myself, okay, I live in Hamilton. If my review question is what are the attributes of entrepreneurial leadership within Hamilton in Scotland? It will be what? It will be too narrow. It will be too small. I won't even get any literature that would have examined the attributes of leaders in Hamilton, Scotland. So you need to be able to draw a line between what is too broad and what is too narrow. So you need to develop your review questions. So when you're developing your review questions, they need to be concise, they need to be focused. You need to ask yourself, these questions, are they concise? Are they focused? Will they produce the results I'm looking for? So you need to ask yourself those questions while you're developing your review questions. And when you have developed your review questions, you need to take it to your expert panel, those people that you have made your panel, and ask them whether these review questions are appropriate or whether you think they can be amended. So in doing that, you now develop what is called a review protocol. A review protocol is the plan of the review that you're going to conduct. In the review protocol, you have your review questions, you have your inclusion and exclusion criteria that you are asking about, and you have the rationale for your study, you have your search strings or databases. All those things will be in your review protocol. So when you have your review protocol, then you would now ask your expert panel as well to agree and validate the review protocol. Like I said, your review questions have to be focused, have to be concise, they won't be too narrow. The criteria for inclusion and exclusion is also important, and we'll be looking at that now. You need to ask yourself, what is the criteria for my inclusion and exclusion for the papers I'm looking at? Because if you don't have an inclusion and exclusion criteria, it becomes very difficult. So you have to say, okay, yes, these papers, and maybe I'm going to focus on just journal papers. I will not be looking at gray literature. I will not focus on book chapters. So your inclusion and exclusion criteria is important, but they all have to be in your review protocol. But we'll be looking at the criteria as we go along. So these are the examples of the review questions that I used in one of my papers in 2016. So you can see it was, what is the influence of entrepreneurial leadership? What are the attributes of an entrepreneurial leader? And how do these leaders develop these attributes? So these were the review questions. Before I came up with these review questions, I had an expert panel of people, and we went back and forth before we agreed on this review question, because we wanted to find out, these were the key things we wanted to find out, and we agreed on that. Then the inclusion and exclusion criteria is also important, because it will guide you on knowing what you're looking for and what you're not looking for. So what are the things I want to include in my literature search? So one of the drawbacks of this is that sometimes it could be so narrow, or it could be so broad. So for me, and for many people, they tend to use the language. So for me, one of the things I did was to use English. So papers that should be in English. I don't understand French, I don't understand Italian, so I excluded those papers. So another criteria that you tend to use might also be the focus of the paper. So the paper I wrote there was on entrepreneurial leadership. So the focus should be on entrepreneurial leadership. It should not be on transformational leadership. It should not be on something else. So you also want to have an inclusion criteria that makes it focused on the approach you want to take or the theory you want to adopt. Also, another inclusion criteria I adopted was it should focus on one or more of the review questions. You can see I had those review questions. So the paper should address one or more of them. Then I had a time frame as well. So there are different ways you can have your inclusion and exclusion criteria, but these were the ones I adopted. exclusion criteria, of course, for me, I didn't want to look at gray literature. Gray literature means conference proceedings, things that are not really journal articles. So it depends on what you're trying to do. For many people, they eliminate gray literature, but sometimes it could be useful. It depends on what you're looking at. So I won't tell you to eliminate gray literature every time, but it's something that would help your work to be more manageable. Then, of course, like I said before, papers that are not focused on leadership. So your criteria is dependent on what you're trying to do. It depends on what you're trying to examine, your review questions, but you need to have an exclusion criteria because it's going to help you to sift out the number of papers or studies that you're trying to examine. And so, I mean, is it okay now? Have I answered your question yet?
Yeah, it's okay. Just concerning the peer-reviewed publication.
Okay.
In the case of my research, I had to not include that as an exclusion criteria because most of the research conducted in the field of my research is Western based. It's predominantly Western, and I'm conducting research in a non-Western context, and that's why I had to look at similar research that has been conducted in non-Western context, and most of it was not always peer reviewed.
Okay, it's good. I'm happy you said that. And that's what I was saying from the beginning. It all depends on what you're trying to do. You might realize that within your area, many of the papers are not peer reviewed. And if you decide to make that an exclusion criteria, you might not have any paper at all. So the first thing you need to ask yourself, in my study or in my domain, how will this criteria influence what I'm trying to do? In your case, of course, you wanted to go beyond that. We're going to use gray literature. I've seen systematic literature reviews that have been conducted that the exclusion criteria was even a high impact factor journals. So they were using the CARBS list of 3 and 4 star. They only wanted papers from a 3 and 4 star. So these are for somebody like you that is doing your PhD, of course, that is not the best way to go. But if you are publishing and writing a paper, for many of us, you might want to limit your criteria or make it even more focused. But there's always a criteria because it helps it to be more manageable. But good. So feel free to continue asking questions. But certainly the second part is when you have planned or organized your review, the second thing is to carry out the review in the next phase is to carry that out. And in carrying that out, what I always say is you need to source the literature. You have planned for it. You have the panel. You have tried to look at the criteria. You have developed the review questions. But you need to what? Develop your search strings. That is the most important part of systematic literature review. But if your search strings are wrong, then you will be getting wrong results. So you have to ask yourself, the way I always start is first, there are some seminal works already in the domain after your scoping study. So how did you come up with those seminal papers? How did you search to come up with those seminal papers? The way you search, those things will be very, very useful in developing your search strings. Your search strings should emerge from your review questions. If you're looking at entrepreneurial leadership, then I would expect entrepreneurial leadership to be part of your search strings. Your search string will be informed by that. But also, similar to your review questions, if your search strings are too broad, you will get so much information. The librarians will tell you that you have to develop your search strings in a way whereby you can sift out manageable data. So using Boolean strings or Boolean operators will be very important. So you have to use Boolean, because just imagine if you type leadership in Emerald, you get so much. So you need to be able, based on your review questions, you need to ask yourself, what search strings can I use? So you have to play with your search strings continuously because you can't just use any type of search strings. I tend to use labels. You use Boolean strings, you use truncations. Truncations means, like if you're looking at entrepreneurship and you don't want to just get entrepreneurship, but also want to get entrepreneurial. You put entrep and you put the star on top. So it gives you entrepreneurial, it gives you a great number of range of articles as well. So you need to be able to do that. Then of course you have the wide cards that helps you to be able to determine maybe those ones that have synonyms, American English, if you write utilize, Z or S. So you put those kind of things in between. But you should be able to play with your set strings. And those set strings have to be validated by your expert panel as well. So when you come up with your set strings, you have to go back. So you need to have different set strings. I would always propose at least up to 3 different set strings. And those set strings will have different levels. Because if your set string is getting so much and you're not able to manage it, then you need to amend your set string. So it's an interactive process. You go back and forth in ensuring that you get those set strings in place. So the set strings are very, very important. Then your databases are very important. You need to be able to use databases. So you have your set strings, they need to identify the databases that you're going to apply those set strings in. I always propose 8 databases. You use the likes of Web of Science, Emerald, Taylor and Francis, so that some databases you can use. So when you read my papers I'll be sharing with you now, you will see that there are databases that we use in management research. But of course, it depends on where you are. If you're in business and management, we have some databases that are very useful. But in the health sciences, you also have your databases. But you need to know the databases that you want to use, and you have to make a list of them. Because what you will be doing is that you'll be using those set strings across all those databases. So you're going back and forth, and you're applying the set strings and the different levels across all those databases. Then what's important is after you have done that, after you have applied your set strings across those databases, when you get the papers, you do what is called a cross-referencing. So let's assume you get a paper, you look at the reference list as well and find out, okay, yes, what are those in the reference list? Are there papers there that are also important to my review questions? Then you will go back and take note of those papers. So first you use the set strings, go across databases, use the Microsoft Excel sheets, try and make notes of the different results you've gotten across those databases. Because if you use all those set strings, take note of all of them, the 8 databases, after the set string 1, set string 2, set string 3, what numbers of papers did you get? Take note of the papers. Then sometimes you will have duplicates because you might see the same paper across different databases. So what do? You eliminate them. You have to eliminate those papers that are coming up over and over again, but you have to take note of those papers. Then you go to their reference list and look at the references to find out which ones appeal to your work. So maybe your set strings were not good enough, but when you have so many in your reference list that your set strings were not able to detect, it means that there's a problem with your set strings in the first place. So you also need to be careful because of the cross-referencing is not meant to bring so much, because it's assumed that most of the things in the reference list will be things that would have emerged from your searching. But if you have so many, it also means that you have to go back to your set strings. Then your citation search is very important. But what it means is you're not doing the opposite. So rather than look at the reference list of the papers that you have identified, what you would do is you have to find out where these papers have been cited. So you can use Google Scholar and you can find out where these papers were cited. So if this, Harrison 2016, how many papers have cited it? So if any paper that has cited that paper might be useful to your work. So you do what I call a backward search and also a forward search, and you take notes of those papers. Any questions for now? Okay, good. Let me continue, and we'll have questions after that. So then you have to screen the literature. Okay, I think Joshua wants to ask a question. Joshua, yeah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay, Ayo, okay.
Yeah.
Ayo first, then Joshua.
Okay, my question is, when you talk about the search string, is it better to base the search string on the title of the paper or the review question? Which one is the most appropriate?
Okay, good. I think it's a combination of both. So your review questions should inform your search strings. That's important. but your title should also reflect your review questions. So if your title does not reflect your review questions, then it means that there's a problem with your title. So I would assume that both of them should inform your research, your search strings, because any title should be informed by your review questions too. So it's just that you cannot just use the title as a search string. You need to modify the title. Like I said, try to ensure that those keywords within the title, let's assume maybe agricultural development. So maybe agriculture, Boolean string, and development. So those kind of things will be useful in searching, but you should use a combination of both. Is that okay? Hey, Joe.
Yeah, the only thing I was going to say is with the citation searching as well, you can go backwards, but also go forwards too. So you can see the paper you found is very, very important. You can see who else has cited it, especially good with more recent papers too.
Okay, good. Joshua, you're very correct, because at the end, so what you want to do is you want to see where those papers were cited. So if you've identified a paper, who cited that paper, and those papers that cited also means that they might be relevant to the kind of work you're trying to do. So you need to go back to it. I know it's, of course, when I'm saying this, don't worry, we'll still get to a part that will show you exactly, because it could be very abstract to you. Then the next step is screening the literature. So now you have the literature, you have done the search strings. Like, let me give you an example of the search. So this is what I was talking about with the search string. So it makes it easier for you. So these are the search strings. So when I'm saying, okay, yes, or search string 1, 2, 3, 4. So I had 5 different search strings in one of my systematic literature reviews, and I used this across different databases. So you can see that for every database, you have different results coming out. So maybe on your spreadsheet on Emerald, you might have 20 on. So you have to take notes. For search string 1, how many did database 1 come up with, and what are those papers? For search string 2, how many emerged? For search string 3, how many emerged? You can see some Boolean strings being used. You can see some truncations as well being used for entry and lead. So you have to be able to use those keywords across the different databases, and you have to take notes of all of it. So this is very important, because with this search string, I'm able to go back and do it across, and anybody can do it again. Joshua can go back and conduct it and expects to get the same result. And that's what makes it systematic. So this is very important. And again, you now need to choose the databases that you're trying to take. So your databases, like I said, I tend to use 8, but either way, that's one of the drawbacks. You have to justify the ones you've chosen. These are very good databases, the Emerald, the Science Direct, the Wiley Online, the Sage, but I'm not saying these are the best. You could also use other databases, but this is very important.
Sorry, Alison, I need to clear something. I'm taking us back to the previous slides.
Okay.
And my question here is, this one.
Yeah.
When you're doing the search for each of the keywords, do you also do subject heading along with the keyword search for each of these search strings, or you just go ahead, just keyword search for in all the databases?
Okay, so good. It all depends on the databases as well. Some databases have different approaches. Some are very difficult to navigate. So you have to understand how the databases work. Some of them will not let you put all of them together. So you have to, some of them have ladders and steps. Like when you go to Emerald, you can put it in a different way. So this is a guide to how it was done across databases. But sometimes you might have to be able to use it, but you have to take notes of how it was done. So with this, what I did was I put the entry there for the first stage, lead the second one. So it's equivalent to entry and lead. So if you're using a Boolean string, for search string 1, it means that entry truncation and lead. So in a database that you cannot put all this in different levels, you can use Boolean strings. So you have to be able to know how to search with those databases, because there are different databases with different approaches to search.
Yeah,
okay?
Yeah, but what I want to know is, some authors will say when you do your search, you do the subject heading to search, and again you also do keywords before you now apply your truncations and wildcards and all that. So my question is, from these search strings that you've developed, is one expected to follow that same pattern where you do subject heading search, keyword search before you apply the wildcards and truncations for each of these search strings?
So the truth is the subject heading. So the search strings, what you're saying is almost the same thing. So when they say subject heading, the subject heading is one of the search strings. So it could be so let's assume the subject heading is entrepreneurial leadership. That might be maybe the first level of the search string. The second one you might be talking about might be one of the keywords. So it depends on how you're trying to do it. Subject headings are very good for scoping studies because they would help you to get a very good grasp of the field. But at the end, it's all about the search strings that you apply. So the subject heading and that you might want to put might be useful, but if you're getting so much, then of course you need to be able to apply much more. Like if I put only entrepreneurial leadership, then I would get so many things, Abe. So I will now have to try to manage it by adding more keywords. That is the reason why those authors say add more keywords, because of just the subject heading will get you maybe 1,000. Just put only leadership, you will get 1,000 articles. So that is why you have to put those other ones. But good, I know we're running out of time, and I want us to try and
Thank you so much.
Great. So the next thing is to screen the literature. And screening the literature now means that we have gotten all this. We have been able to get across the databases. We have the papers already, and we have cross-referenced those papers. We have done forward and backward searches. So we have the number. We have removed the duplicates, and we have a good number. So when we have those papers, what do? We go back to our review protocol and try to ensure that it suits our inclusion and exclusion criteria. If you can remember, we had a criteria. So when you look at those papers, you are, okay, does it suit our criteria? Is it within the same timeline? Is it focused on English? So if it's easier when the database itself can help you with that. But most of the time, if it can't, you need to use your review protocol again to try to ensure that you screen the literature. A good way of screening those papers is to do a very fast abstract screening. So you read the abstract very fast. So let's assume you have maybe 200 papers that you've been able to identify from this whole process, and you've taken note of it. You do a quick read of the abstract. Sometimes these papers might satisfy everything that you're looking for, but when you read the abstract, you realize that it doesn't have any evidence about what you're trying to do. So you eliminate those papers. So you do a quick read of the abstracts to ensure that those papers suit what you're trying to look at. Then you eliminate those ones that are not suitable. Then there's another process that is called the study quality assessment. And in this case, what you're now doing is, after you have eliminated those papers that the abstracts don't show it, then you would now ask yourself, with those papers that you have, do they report unambiguous findings? Are these papers great? Because sometimes these papers might be published in some predator journals that you know that they don't have credibility. So you might say, no, these papers, I cannot really show that are credible. So sometimes when you read the paper, you realize that it is not even referenced well, it's not written well. So this is what is called the study quality assessment. You need to ensure that the papers, the results have been done in an appropriate way. Papers that don't suit your quality assessment, those two questions, you eliminate them and you ensure that you have a great manageable number. So at the end, you now have some papers that suit what you're trying to do. Then the next step is to now extract the data from those papers. So you take note of the number of papers that have met all this, that you've eliminated, number of papers that passed the abstract, number of papers that have gone through the study quality assessment, then you take a final note of them. In looking at the screening, I always advise that it's not just one person that does it. It's usually done by more than at least two people, so that you would be able to know, because sometimes you could be biased towards it. You can look, what is Joshua saying? How does Joshua look at it? How does Ayodele look at this? Or how does Janet look at this? So it helps you. And if you don't agree, then you might need a third person that will try to ensure that these papers are the right ones that you have chosen. After that, you have your final number of papers and you take note of the day that it has been finalized. And that is the end. So you have conducted your literature review and you've conducted your search, and you now have the papers that you want to look at. Then most importantly, and this is where it's quite difficult for a lot of people, now you have those papers. Why did you take those papers? Because you want to extract data from them. You need the data because you want to justify the gap. You need the data because you want to show us what those papers are talking about. Don't forget you had review questions. So the next step is now to analyze the data that you're going to extract. So you're going to extract, so the data you want from those maybe 70 papers or 80 papers will be dependent on what you're trying to do. I always propose that you at least do two forms of analysis, a quantitative analysis and a qualitative analysis. A quantitative one means you get like those papers, then you ask yourself, especially if you're conducting a thesis and you want to justify a lot, where was the paper published? So was it published in Scotland? Was it published in Egypt? Was it published in Nigeria? We take note of that. Which papers or which journals were they published in? What are the number of citations within the domain? What was the highest number of citations? What kind of papers are there? Are they conceptual papers? Are they empirical papers? And how do they answer my review questions? So you do a descriptive analysis and you do charts, pie charts, bar charts, and you're able to show us those statistical information. And that is one of the core things, I think Michael was asking, that's one of the core things you need to present in a paper that has a systematic literature review focus, because you need to show us how you've analyzed them quantitatively. And then the qualitative analysis is also important because for those papers, now you have to do a thematic analysis. There are different authors that look at it. You have the likes of Brown and Clark, King and Horrocks. So you might want to analyze those themes. What are the important themes that have emerged from those papers that you have been able to sift out? What are they saying? What is the arguments? And you're able to come up with those themes. And that would help you, for those of you that are writing a thesis or writing something, those are the themes that would emerge. And those are things that you're trying to discuss because you've analyzed and coded those papers. So as you can see, this is what I mean. In that paper, all the papers, you ask yourself, where were they published? Oh, most of them, like 10 of them are published in the UK, some were published in the States, 35 were published in the States. You can see that there were very few published in all these places. So if you're a PhD student, you might be saying that, wow, there has been no study done in Tanzania. So that is a gap, because you're trying to show clearly that there have been many studies done within the domain from the UK and US, but there have been little studies or few studies that have been conducted within this region. So it shows you and helps you address a gap, but you need to be able to show this within your work. So this is the countries, but of course there are other things that you should show, not just countries. But that is one of the things I would assume that you should show. You should show the conceptual papers and all that. Then finally, I know we're running out of time. The thematic analysis. For me, those themes emerged in one of my papers, and the themes that emerged is that I realized that, okay, yes, this is the way people have looked at entrepreneurial leadership. It's an intersection of entrepreneurship and leadership as a behavioral profile. So when you read the papers, you have to ask yourself, what are the important themes that are emerging? How are people viewed entrepreneurial leadership over time? So if you're looking at CSR, entrepreneurship, HR, look at those papers and try to see, and that is why that's a solid part of the systematic literature review, because now you're doing what a narrative review would do, but you have those papers and you're not trying to look at the themes that have emerged from those papers clearly. And I know the limitations. The limitation here, of course, is like we're talking about the search strings. If you don't get the search strings right, it doesn't really work very well. And the databases that you use would also be important. Also the completion time, because the whole idea is that you want to ensure that it can be done again. So if you so you need to take note of when you stopped your systematic literature review, so you can go back again and do it. So if you do something in 2021, papers in 2022, you won't be able to get it. So that is why you have to be able to take notes of the time, so that any author that goes and does it again will know that, yes, oh, Ayo did it in November. That is why you can't see this paper. So if I do it now, I'll be able to see things in 2022. So it helps you, but also a disadvantage because there's a completion time. And of course, most importantly, the questions you consider. The efficacy of a literature review or an SLR is limited to the review questions you do. So if your questions are different, then you have different results, because your review questions will determine the kind of papers that you're looking for. And that is me. These are the references. Like I said, the slides will be available. Many of them are my papers I've written over the years on conducting one, and those ones would definitely help you. So now, questions. Let's go to the questions. I know that.
I have a question.
Okay.
If I want to write a systematic literature review as a paper, do you have any additional documents you could share, like as a template or as a framework that helps just thinking through the kind of main blocks that we need to consider?
Okay, good. Great. I'm happy, Michael, you said that. On the reference list, you see I have like 4 papers that I wrote that I conducted a systematic literature review, and I think those papers are available online. So by the time I share the slides, please go and look at those papers. They are written exactly like an SLR. So you can use those as a template. And it covers exactly what I've said. You have to do the 3 phases: organizing, carrying out the review, and reporting the review. Then you also need to provide future areas for research, because you're reporting it, and also a conclusion. But a template is available on the slide, and go to it's. One of the ones I really, really like is the one I published in 2016. That's why I'm making reference to that, because it's quite easy to follow. The one in 2019 was also great, but I developed a conceptual framework for that. And the one in 2019 was more focused on HR. So there are so many, but when I share the slides, please look at it. You'll be able to access at least 1 or 2 of it.
Great, and we can just download it from the website?
Yes, you should be able to download it from the website, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so I know a lot of questions, so I don't know who asked first, but we'll start with Ayodele, then we move. Okay, Ayodele, I think that was a legacy hand, or was it an old hand?
Yeah, I want to ask a question.
Okay.
Yeah, does the size of paper, I mean the number of journal review, does it determine the quality of the systematic literature review, or there is no particular size of journal? It doesn't matter whether it's much or it's small or it's big.
Okay, good. I'm happy you said that. And that was one of the things I spoke about with the inclusion and exclusion criteria. For some people, you have to ask yourself what's important to you. I've seen SLRs conducted that they looked at high impact factor journals. So they looked at maybe Leadership Quarterly, 3 and 4 star. So, but I always say that you shouldn't take that approach, because so far the journal is reputable, so far it's peer reviewed, then you should use it, because you would miss. I've seen we always argue about this in our ref meetings. Like you see a lot of very good papers in 2-star publications. You see them in a 1-star publication. So if you now say, I'm going to use high impact factor journals, I'm going to use 4-star journals, then you might miss very significant outputs. So I always advise people that really want to show novelty and originality, don't go with very high impact factor journal. But still, I've seen published a lot whereby people only just say, I just want to do.
No, that is not what I mean. What I mean is the number of paper itself, maybe 80 journals, 20 journals, or 30 journals.
Oh, okay. You mean the number of journals? Okay,
the number of journals, paper to be reviewed.
Okay. Yes, clearly it depends on what you're looking for. If in the domain there are very few papers, I've seen in the medical sciences where the SLR only had like 20, because it means that there is little in the space. So don't be scared when you have only 20 papers. It means that there is little within that space, and there's originality. But I always say that you have to ask yourself, clearly, if you're only having 5 papers, and your search string is also very limiting, so you don't also want to be the one that is causing it. So you might want to broaden your search string so that you can get more papers. But an average systematic literature review tends to have close to 100 most of the time, like 80, 70, within that range. But of course, it depends on the space and what you're trying to look at. So I've seen ones that have had just 15 in that sense, but it doesn't change it, but it depends on your search strings and it depends on the topic area. Like things like crisis leadership now is a very new form of leadership. I've been looking at that space and there are very few papers that have used as crisis leadership itself. If I'm doing an SLR on that, I don't expect to have 100 papers. So it depends on the arguments and conversations within that space. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So I think Rangi, we were trying to ask a question.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison. So my question is basically, so if I'm doing my MSc in project management on my dissertations, so how can I do the cross comparison? Like you mentioned that we have to do the cross comparison from the another people as well. So there won't be any kind of bias.
Okay, what I didn't get what you said. If you're looking now, okay?
Yeah, suppose if I'm looking the papers, like 23 papers related with my articles, how can I do the cross comparison with the another lecturer, or how can I do this kind of cross comparison?
Okay, what you mean? So what I meant there was more like screening. So after you have done the inclusion criteria and you've been able to screen the papers, sometimes just to ensure there's credibility, you can get somebody else to also have a second look at how you screened it and trying to ensure that you can get the same results. So it mustn't be a member of the expert panel. It can just be somebody, it can be your colleague that can do the same thing that you've done to get the same result. It just shows credibility. So that what the person will be doing is within your inclusion and exclusion criteria that you've used, the person will try and look at those papers. And if the person gets the same result, it means that you can show and you'll be able to say, yes, it was done by 2 people and it provided the same results. So it just shows reliability and validity. But it's not compulsory, Rangel, that. But it's just good practice. Somebody else does it so that at least you can justify that it has been done. The same thing with coding. We always say, for those of you that are quantitative researchers, we tell you that to try to do another should code your work. It provides reliability. It doesn't mean that only you can do the process. You should. But one thing is compulsory is that you have to have an expert panel that will help you with the process. Does it answer your question, Rangel?
Yeah, but as I said, I'm doing my MSc in project management, and I don't think there will be anyone who will be looking after my work. So that's my question.
Oh, okay, so Rangel, then since you're doing it and you don't think there's anybody, then do it on your own. But that would be a limitation.
Yeah. So will it create any bias on my work?
It won't create a bias really, but it's better when you have somebody to support you in looking at it. But it doesn't matter. It's only that somebody will come back and tell you that, okay, how did you ensure that it was reliable? But of course, if you have gone through all this process and you did the right thing, then there will be no problem. But we always advise, if you can, to have somebody else to do that.
Thank you, Dr. Harrison.
Thank you, Rangel. So any questions about the process? Any questions at all? This is time to ask questions. Like I can't see the whole screen. Okay, like 2 pages. Okay. Any questions? Okay, I can see many things. I hope you all found it informative. I hope you all, okay, Paul wants to ask a question. Paul?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Harrison. I have a question. I played a question on the chat, but this is not seen. I wanted to find out, averagely, how many papers do you need to read for a basic systematic review paper, and how many of them do you need to reference for a particular review, basically, a systematic review?
Okay, so the question is, it depends, Paul. So the number of papers that you have to be, like I think it was Ayo that asked that same question. It depends on the area. If it's a very, very novel area, then you might have very few papers within the domain. If it's a very saturated area, like maybe ethical leadership or transformational leadership, then it's expected that you have more papers. But it's also dependent on your review questions. I always say, if you have so many papers, if you have very few papers, then go back to your search strings, go back to your review questions and find out whether you can broaden it. If you can't broaden it, then you have to work with what you have. Maybe it just means that Paul is going to be the forerunner in that space. It means that we'll be able to cite Asare in the future. So it all depends, but the average SLR tends to have below 100 papers, ideally. Most of the SLRs I've done are usually within 70, 80, because it gives you so much potential to discuss and the themes that emerge from it. Okay, thanks, Paul. I'm sorry I was not looking at the chat because I can see a lot of things on the chat. So I'm sorry that if you left a message on the chat and I can't see it. So any questions apart from the one from Paul, or if you put it on the chat, you can ask me the questions online now. Okay, I can see that most of the questions, is there a year limit to SLR? Okay. Okay, I think there is a year, of course, there is a limit to the SLR. So like I said before, you need to be able to state it clearly, the time that you stopped, so that another person, we said from the beginning that it has to be reproducible, systematic. So if you don't put the year there, how are we going to know when you stopped? So it's also a limitation, because I won't be able to know when you did it. So it's important, because it means that you won't be able to get anything that you have done in 2020, anything that has been done in 2023 will not be seen if you are done it in 2021. So I always say that what you need to do is you have to go back and freshen your SLR. So if you have done it before, it's quite easy. Do it again, and you will be able to get 1 or 2 papers back in. So that is the way you always use against that limitation, is that you can always refreshen it. It's the same questions, go back and just do it again, that you might just identify 1 or 2 papers. Kira.
Well, thank you for the nice presentation regarding the literature review. So one question I want to ask is regarding, I just viewed one article regarding the type of literature review, and it mentioned that there is a type of literature review where it has mentioned structural and non-structural literature review. So could you please tell me what is the major difference between the structural literature review and the systematic literature review?
Okay, so there are different literature reviews, and there are so many. Of course, that's not the focus of this session. You have your narrative literature review, you have your critical literature review, you have your systematic literature review. So there are many ways to review literature. But total literature review means that you're following a particular structure. So yes, you're showing the process. You want to say something?
Actually, my supervisor had suggested me to use both the method, systematic and the structural, because my talk is quite vast and I have to go for the different aspect to find searches in a different aspect. So he suggested me to go for the systematic literature review and follow the structural. That's why I'm confused.
Yeah, because I think what the supervisor is trying to say there, and I've done it for many of my students, is we say you have to combine both a narrative literature review and a systematic literature review. In your narrative literature review, it gives you if the area is very broad and you can't, like, just imagine, let's assume you want to look at entrepreneurial leadership. Yeah. You might want to do a literature review on entrepreneurship, on leadership. Then you not conduct a systematic literature review on entrepreneurial leadership. So you can see that you're trying to do both. So you have to do an SLR exactly on what you're trying to do, but your narrative literature review will provide a context, an understanding of the broad area. Especially if an SLR, although I propose an SLR, so sometimes an SLR is not a solution to everything, because it tries to limit exactly what you're trying to find out. But if you're trying to have a broad reasoning about a particular field, then you might have to do a narrative or structural literature review.
Okay, if there is a gap, then
okay, what did you say?
So if there is suppose I'm doing certain research, and if there is a gap on that research, can my research be like ethical? Like, will it support my work or not?
Yes, definitely. The whole idea of the SLR is to help provide to support the gap.
Yeah.
So just like if you see what I was trying to say, all those things are like gaps. Oh yes, just imagine, okay, I didn't put it on the slide, but just imagine if one of the things that you had 80 papers or 70 papers and you realize that all of them took a quantitative approach to the study. So if HERA is now saying that I want to take a qualitative approach to the study, it means that you're trying to justify that nobody has taken that approach.
Yeah.
So there is a gap already and there's a contribution trying to say, yes, this is the way to examine it.
Yeah.
The same thing with the region, the same thing with the, what do you call it? It's the same thing with the nature of the papers. It all shows you, it provides a gap. So an SLR is always the best way to show the gap to knowledge.
Yeah, thank you. So regarding the methodology, so we need to, regarding for the literature review on a methodology, we need to clearly mention the source in string also, right?
Exactly. I've examined a lot of PhDs, and one of the things that many of them do is that they say they have conducted a systematic literature review, and they don't tell us the search strings. It's impossible for you to say that you have done it in a thesis here that you're trying to do without telling us, giving us all this. You need to be able to show everything I've told you, the search strings and databases, at least you must show us that is the kind of things you, so that at the end, you said it from the beginning, so that somebody else can do it and be able to replicate it. So if you don't show all that information on your review protocol, then nobody can do it apart from you.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much for clearing out the concept. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay, I know we are running out of time. Any other questions? I know many of you might still want to reach out to me. Of course, you know my email, christian.harrison@uws.ac.uk. So you can send me emails and all that. I'm happy to support you. The slides will be there. You can download the papers. It's really easier, to be fair, when you have a paper and you work towards it. So those papers will help you. So just download them and that will guide you. But of course, feel free to reach out, feel free to be in touch, and we can discuss much more about it. I hope you all found it useful. Thank you so much for attending. It was great. I think today was our record attendance. So that was great. I'm happy, I'm pleased that that was involved in the process. But it's great to talk about it. I know we'd have loved to take so much time to do this, but of course we have other things we're trying to do. Hopefully we might run this session another time in case people still want to do it.
Just a quick question.
Yeah. Okay, Tunde.
I'd like to clarify, the recorded version of this meeting, is it going to be sent to us via mail, or we have to access it somewhere?
Yes. Okay, so the recorded version of the meeting will be on our website, our business school website. So it's there. So okay, let me try to get the link. Just give me a minute. So I'll put the link there so you can help. Try and get a link for you guys. So I'll put the link. So the link is there. So all the past seminars that we have done to date are all there. So you can always go back and watch them. So when you go to the research seminar tab, you will see that. So what's going to happen is that by the time we have our YouTube channel, so by the time I've downloaded this, sent it across to the IT department, it's not going to come now. So yeah, of course, the School of Education, everybody can access it. It's for everybody. So anybody can, even if you're not within the university, you can access it. Just go to our website. I put the link there. That's a direct link to it. So you can go watch it at your free time. But everybody that
where did you put the link?
On the chat.
Sorry to interrupt. On the chat. Okay, sorry. Didn't see it.
We can't see it on the chat.
Okay, sorry. Do you know what happened? Thank you for reminding me. It was in those in the waiting room were the ones that could see it.
Oh, thank you.
So, can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's there now. So you can always get across and look at it. So it will help you. So thank you very much. There'll be another seminar on the 22nd. So watch this space. That's going to be about PRIM development. So that's from a speaker from the University of Bedfordshire. So he's going to be sharing much more about PRME. So please ensure you attend. So it's great to have everybody here. But if there are no questions, thank you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for the great feedback. I hope you enjoyed the session, and we will see in the next few weeks. Take care.
Thank you, Dr. Christian. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Yana.
Thank you so much.